Best friends Eric Monkman and Bobby Seagull are no ordinary tourists.
Ow.
They shot to fame with their epic tussles on University Challenge.
Rashomon.
Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five.
Very good.
United by their love of British history, they're embarking on an adventure with a difference.
Monkman and Seagull in hot pursuit.
Traveling through time, from 1750 to 1900. Getting their hands on the greatest inventions of the Industrial Revolution and the Victorian era.
You beauty.
When scientific innovation transformed Britain into a global superpower.
This 150-year period, I would call it the greatest makeover of mankind.
They will seek out the...
We read about the stories of our heroes, and now we get the chance to follow in their footsteps.
In this period, there were more changes and discoveries, both to science and to society, that had occurred since the beginning of recorded history.
Would you like one of these candies in here?
Yeah, maybe a candy.
I'm looking forward to this adventure because it's a chance to explore the science and technology and industry of our country. I'm really excited to see things that have played a key role in the UK's progress.
Wine gum or sports mix?
Oh.
On this, the first leg of their journey, Monkman and Seagull are traveling to their pick of the breakthroughs that defined the late 1700s. A time when Britain achieved mastery of the world's oceans.
Westward ho!
When steam power breathed life into our industries and factories. And when the newly invented locomotive put us on track for greatness. It's 1759. Monkman and Seagull are in Greenwich for an encounter with a pocket watch destined to change the course of history.
Beautiful architecture.
Absolutely stunning.
In the late 1700s, Britain's fledgling overseas empire was a source of raw materials and trade, underpinned by systems of slavery. But millions of tons of cargo and thousands of lives were lost every year in shipwrecks, caused primarily by navigational errors.
In the age of global positioning systems, it's easy to forget what a problem it was just to figure out where you are in the olden days. People could figure out their latitude, that's where they were in terms of north and south, by observing the heavens. But longitude was a more difficult problem. People thought, how will we figure it out?
So Parliamentary Act set up the Longitude Board and ultimately the Longitude Prize, which was £20,000 if anyone could solve the longitude problem. And it's almost like the X Factor, but more money and even more important, like 20 grand is worth like a couple of million now.
The government offered a reward to whoever could solve the pressing problem of determining longitude at sea. To calculate their longitude, sailors relied upon knowing the precise time of the Greenwich meridian. But the motion of the waves and the fluctuating temperatures meant there wasn't a clock on Earth accurate enough to provide this essential information. Enter John Harrison, a Lincolnshire clockmaker who took on the challenge set by the Board of Longitude. Obsessed with finding a solution, he toiled for 4 decades, creating numerous unsuccessful prototypes. Until in 1759, he cracked the problem with the world's most accurate timepiece. Harrison christened it H4. Soon the world would know it as the marine chronometer.
What this meant was that sailors traveling around the world had an accurate clock that could withstand topsy-turvy seas, humidity, temperature changes that could tell them the time of Greenwich. And ultimately, it meant sailors could navigate the world and have something that told them their exact longitude.
Today, Harrison's priceless H4 prototype lies in the Royal Observatory at Greenwich. It is the maritime equivalent of the Holy Grail.
Beautifully designed, isn't it?
It's impressive.
This looks like a really beautiful pocket watch.
What Harrison showed was that it's possible to calculate longitude by means of an accurate clock. It works through the use of springs and other complicated mechanisms to keep accurate time.
The secret of its success is how rapidly it ticks. The use of complex mechanisms, including a large balance, allows it to tick 5 times a second, far quicker than any other timepiece of the period. Harrison's H4 was quickly replicated for use by mariners.
Do you have your sailing license, Mr. Monkman?
At last they could maintain accurate time and thus their exact position at sea.
So if I turn this way, should the boat turn?
We want to turn so that we're
turn,
facing...
yeah, so it'll go that way, yeah. So it's that
the
way.
opposite. So we've discovered our new island. For the Admiralty, we want to mark exactly where it is on the map.
So I have a globe. Mm-hmm. Let me use my lung capacity, my VO2 max, to test it out.
Well, every good ship should have some sort of charting method.
There we go. This Earth is full of air.
So, we've started in Greenwich, and we've gone down towards the equator to catch the trade winds. We can figure out the latitude of the island by taking measurements of the North Star at night. Now imagine we want to find the longitude. Fortunately, we brought with us...
a gift courtesy of Mr. Harrison. It's going to be H4.
We have our incredibly accurate H4 chronometer. This will tell us the time in Greenwich. So we can figure out the time here based on when our shadows point directly north. If it's 4 o'clock in London, when it is noon on the ship...
We know that around the globe...
360.
Yeah. And we've got 24 hours in a day. So 360 divided by 24 gives us 15 degrees. So 4 hours gives us 60 degrees of longitude from Greenwich.
So here's Greenwich.
Yes.
So 1, 2, 3, 4. So here is the location of our mysterious island, which we can take back to the Admiralty.
What should we name this island?
Monkman and Seagull Island.
Monkman and Seagull Island. I think it's time to head towards Canada. Westward ho!
Farewell, Monkman and Seagull Island.
Captain Cook called the chronometer his trusty friend after it aided his voyage to Antarctica. Thanks to H4, Britain's trade routes were significantly enhanced, leaving their continental rivals in the doldrums.
Long-term, the legacy is, when we've got things like GPS today, ultimately it stems from someone like Harrison saying, actually, we can travel the world and find an exact longitude. It's a strange question. Do you think if the human species was smaller, if you can imagine we're the size of rats but had the intelligence of humans, could we have created an industrial society being that small?
Like not everything else is scaling down, just humans, right?
Yeah, just humans. We scale. Everything else stays the same.
I don't know what crop you would...
Including predators.
Yeah,
a cat stays the same size.
Yeah. You'd have a hard time developing agriculture at that scale. Could you imagine if people had to cut down every individual blade of wheat with a stalk of wheat with an axe?
Yeah.
And domestication, what would you domesticate? Would there be... There aren't too many herd animals at that scale, as far as I know. I mean, I guess there are like lemmings and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But...
It's interesting how then, even though we as a society have ideas and intellect, our physical capabilities still matters, especially at earlier stages of development.
Yeah.
As ocean-going navigation improved, thanks to the marine chronometer, the growth in international trade was becoming extremely profitable. By the late 1760s, cotton cloth was fast becoming one of Britain's most valuable exports.
They could go to the end of the world pretty much, and people there would
still
want
our cotton,
our cotton cloth. So that meant there was an incentive to increase production.
It's 1769. Monkman and Seagull are at Cromford Mills in the Derwent Valley. They're here to see an invention that transformed Britain's economy.
Do you think that would be workers' housing, or do you think it's factory?
It does feel like an industrial little village. We can hear that.
Yeah, there's our water.
Raw cotton was imported to Britain from the Empire on trade ships. It was then woven into cloth before being exported all over the world. By the 1760s, machines called flying shuttles and spinning jennies were in use, but the cotton itself was still largely worked by hand. And try as we might, we simply couldn't make enough of it. That was until Bolton-based wig maker and entrepreneur Richard Arkwright changed the course of history. by inventing a machine to spin cotton fibre into thread quickly and easily. It was the beginning of the factory system.
I'm just going to take off my bag here.
So I'm going to introduce you to 𝗥𝗏𝗃's water frame, which is really where it all began. And this is a really early version of it. So there's just 4 bobbins of cotton being spun on this one. So this is basically his prototype. So if you want to take a step around there to where the handle is, you're now a water wheel. And just keep going, just keep turning. And then what you see happening here is that the frame comes to life.
Arkwright had teamed up with a clockmaker called John Kay to develop his water frame. Later models could spin 128 strands of cotton at the same time. It was powered using the nearby river, mechanizing the spinning process and allowing cotton production to expand far beyond what individuals had ever achieved.
It looks quite precise in terms of the ratios of the gears. Would he have mathematically mapped out, we need X to Y ratio, or was it just trial and improvement?
Very much trial and improvement. Arkwright was not a mechanic. He met a gentleman called John Kay, who was a clockmaker. So when you pointed out all the cogs and gears and everything, he would have known all about that, yes. He had no formal education, but he was always looking for a new business opportunity.
Was he almost like a forefather of this whole concept of let's get as maximum efficiency from our resources as possible?
Absolutely, yeah. Arkwright operated his mills here for 24 hours a day, so really hard conditions for 6 days a week. But it was well paid in comparison with other work at the time, so lots of people were actually migrating to this part of the country to get a job at the cotton mills. So it had a huge impact on the British economy. And it all started with Arkwright's small water frame here. Essentially created the first production line where he had the raw cotton coming in at one end of the building and the finished spun cotton coming out at the other end of the building. And he did that all here at Cromford. And so essentially this place became the blueprint for how to build a successful cotton mill. Arkwright was so successful, he actually became known as the father of the factory system. It was a whole new way of life that they were learning.
Soon, Arkwright's mills, using the river's power to make cotton fabrics, began popping up all along the Derwent Valley. His machines could be operated by unskilled workers, leading to a significant cost saving for mills that installed them. They could now produce fabrics in huge quantities, and within 35 years, Britain's cotton economy was transformed. In 1770, it was worth around £600,000. By 1805, it increased by 17 times to more than £10 million. Arkwright amassed a fortune. And water would go on to power other machines, such as looms, supersizing the whole textile production process.
We see the foundation of factories, people just providing their labor on somebody else's machinery, working at a pace set by somebody else, so that there was a big change.
An operator would look after 6 to 8 of these machines, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So if you just want to push that angle that way, keep it to the side. Keep going. That's it.
Can you feel the beat? Give me a dance floor. The textile industry changed Britain's social fabric because people had moved from working at home domestically in one place to working in factories with clocking in, clocking out hours, a proper job.
So what you want to do is put your hand on that, and then you put your hand on that, and when it goes to the back, push the handle off, right?
Push down and what?
Go for it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
We made some cloth.
Yes.
Back at 7 a.m. tomorrow?
6
Oh, no, it's 6 o'clock in the morning.
6 a.m.
Those inventions really brought cotton production to a major position as a British export, and thanks to industrialization, allowed a country with a relatively small population to be one of the most productive in the world.
The 1760s are widely regarded as the beginning of Britain's Industrial Revolution. Largely prompted by the mechanization of the textile industry and the birth of factories, thousands of people were migrating from their homes in the countryside to a new, more urbanized Britain.
People started to move to cities because they were places where things were produced. In the Middle Ages, a lot of cities were just administrative centers, where the nobility lived, and then People would go there and be artisans to work for the nobility kind of thing. You know, cities became locuses of production during the Industrial Revolution.
Monkman and Seagull are on their way to Birmingham for the next era-defining breakthrough on their itinerary. The city is home to the oldest working steam engine in the world.
Look at all the machinery in there.
Yeah.
This must be the Science Museum.
It looks like it. You can see things moving up and down. Wow, it's huge, huh?
Yeah, this must be it. It looks oldest of all the things here, doesn't it?
Whilst water power opened the floodgates for the Industrial Revolution, steam power was about to supercharge it. Britain was becoming increasingly reliant on coal as its source of energy. As easy-to-reach open coal pits became exhausted, mine shafts as deep as 200 feet were dug to extract more. Deeper mines significantly increased the risk of flooding. So early steam engines were used to pump water out of overflowing pits. But they were highly inefficient and expensive to run, until Scottish engineer James Watt struck upon a simple but groundbreaking modification that he patented in 1769.
Hi, I'm Bobby.
Hiya, Bobby. I'm Greg Walsh, heritage technician.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Eric. Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you too, heritage technician.
I like if you have a hard hat each to wear when we operate the engine.
But Monkman and Seagull aren't merely here to marvel at the steam engine's working parts above ground. They've come to inspect the ingenious twist that James Watt applied to the humble steam engine, that lies deep underneath this machine and that the public don't normally get to see.
Can we see the condenser?
Yes, you can. If we lead the way down the stairs, we'll go and have a look.
Early steam engines worked by heating and cooling steam in the same cylinder. This propelled a piston, the up and down motion of which pumped water out of the mine.
The earlier models of steam engine had a cylinder where steam would be heated and cooled in the same place. So a lot of energy was wasted heating and reheating the cylinder.
James Watt resolved the steam engine's most fundamental problem. By condensing the steam in a separate chamber, which was kept permanently cold, the working cylinder could stay hot for longer, maximizing efficiency and saving a fortune in coal.
With a separate condenser, the cylinder can remain hot, allowing you to get the same amount of power for much less coal.
So this is James Watt's separate condenser, the apparatus he was famous for inventing.
So the one on the left is the condenser?
Yes. The steam would come down this pipe at the top into that chamber, and then the apparatus on the right is a water pump, and that would just pump the condensed water out.
It's amazing to think that this was the thing that sort of changed the game.
The cylinder could stay at a good operating temperature, and all the condensing was done outside the engine in this chamber here, immersed in cool water. People who brought the engine saved huge quantities on fuel because the steam was used more efficiently.
James Watt said, "I can think of nothing else but this machine." And this, to me, epitomizes why he joins the pantheon of great industrialists, because he was so obsessed by trying to create this steam engine that had so much more efficiencies than its predecessors.
This was the greatest single improvement ever made to the steam engine. Engines with Watt's condenser burned 2/3 less coal, meaning that they were more affordable and efficient to run. Watt's partnership with Birmingham-based entrepreneur Matthew Boulton would see their machines monopolize the mining industry, becoming the engine of choice for colliery owners all across the nation.
My understanding is that they didn't charge people for the machine, but they said, we'll charge you 1/3 of the coal savings that you made from the engine. But afterwards, they said actually the equivalent of how much horsepower you save. So the word horsepower I find quite cool. Sort of derives from this ultimately. Horsepower connected to the condenser.
So, Bobby, you're going to be with me on the valves. Eric, you're going to go around with Ian on the steam regulator.
This is the regulator, so if you put your hands on that and get ready to turn it to start the engine.
Watt continued to innovate. In 1782, he modified his engine by introducing rotary motion. Now the applications for his engine extended far beyond pumping water out of mines.
Amazing just seeing it in action. And with the steam there, you can feel it on your face.
They could be set to work almost anywhere. Soon they were powering machines in factories in cities like Manchester and Birmingham. By 1800, there were more than 500 of them in Britain's mines, canals, and factories, leading to an unprecedented increase in the rate at which British trade developed.
So the separate condenser was just a small modification, as it were, but it was a spectacularly successful one. So James Watt has to be considered one of the fathers of the Industrial Revolution.
Are you finding it a bit chilly in here?
A little bit, yeah.
Shall I turn off the...
Yeah, maybe. So James Watt, he had that story where, you know, he's walking on Glasgow Green, and at that particular moment, the vision of a condenser came to him. How much do you think in science that people who have these eureka moments?
Watt would have been working on the problem of how to make steam engines more efficient. He probably thought it was thinking about it and then had that idea, or, you know, and probably he had other similar ideas, and maybe that was just when it coalesced. What I understand with Newton is that he had an incentive to say that he made all of his discoveries when he was really young, because he didn't want to have to admit that he had been inspired by other people. So he was trying to imply that everything just sort of came to him in a stroke of brilliance. He wanted to be like, oh, I was just sitting out there and, you know, had this idea. Another one of these?
Yes, please.
The contribution of science towards Britain's industrial progress was profound. Technological innovation was having an impact on every aspect of society. No longer in the Dark Ages, scientific thinking was seen as something that could improve not only our economy, but our knowledge of the world itself.
Something very significant did happen in the 1700s in terms of people's approach to science, that it should be used to improve society, to create inventions, that knowledge and reason are good things, and that we should order our lives in accordance with them.
After discovering what gave the Industrial Revolution impetus in the South, Monkman and Seagull are travelling north to 1774. They're heading to the Highlands of Scotland and a lonely mountain that made scientific history.
So we can see peaks here.
Peaks, yeah.
So these are, in Scotland, they're known as Munros, but the Munros are anything taller than 3,000 feet.
Okay. And what's a mountain?
Anything more than 2,000 feet.
So all Munros are mountains,
Yes.
but not all mountains are Munros, because there are some mountains that would be above 2,000 and lower than 3,000. And those would be mountains, but not Munros.
Okay.
And there would be some mountains that are over 3,000, but not in Scotland.
Okay, so they're just mountains.
They're just mountains. Everest is not a Munro.
No,
Everest is its own,
just a mountain.
just a mountain.
So everything up to 2,000 feet is just a hill.
I guess so. Is there a minimum height you have to be for a hill?
Wow, it's a whole sort
Holds a whole terminology for these things.
of things that are slightly elevated.
Yeah. A hillock, a mound, a ridge, a
ridge.
dune.
Mount Schiehallion is the site of a momentous experiment to calculate the mass of the planet.
The quest for finding out the mass of the Earth reflects this period of enlightenment. What are the big questions about who are we, where have we come from, what do we know about this world? And the mass of the Earth is part of that quest.
By now, science was becoming accepted as a legitimate branch of knowledge. After his coronation in 1760, George III became the first monarch to study science as part of his education. He purchased huge assortments of scientific instruments and charted the transit of Venus from his very own observatory. King George was the patron of the Royal Society, an institution set up to promote scientific understanding. So when Astronomer Royal 𝗏𝗏 Maskelyne proposed a groundbreaking experiment on a Scottish mountain, the king quickly granted him permission.
Okay, let's make sure we don't get our feet wet in this. No. Hefty old walk we've had.
At this time, it was believed the Earth could in fact be hollow. Maskelyne believed that by taking mathematical measurements at selected points on a suitable mountain, it would be possible to calculate the mass of the planet. 𝘃𝗏𝗋𝗋's isolated location and symmetrical shape made it the ideal choice.
So here we are, 𝘃𝗏𝗋𝗋. So at this time in history, people were trying to explore the world. We had Captain Cook on his voyages. And people were also interested in understanding the physicality of the world, what's the circumference, how much might it weigh? And we're walking, quite literally, in the very footsteps.
Not quite literally.
Yeah, perhaps it's not...
I don't think I can see his footsteps. Take a little bit of break. There we go.
A cup of tea, Eric?
No, thank you.
Okay. Do you mind holding that for a second?
Not at all.
Okay.
The 𝘃𝗏𝗋𝗋 experiment broadly fell into two parts. The first challenge was to work out the mass of the mountain by multiplying its density by its volume.
I brought with me a mountain.
You got a mountain?
Mountain in my bag.
You got a lunch?
Got a lunch, yes. So, let's make a mountain. To calculate the mass of something, you multiply density times volume.
We get the mass.
We get the mass.
So you've got a mountain, a really regular-sized one. We can work out the density, pick up a rock, and it's about 4.5 times the density of water, and assuming it's consistent all the way through. Then, we need to work out the volume of it.
Knowing the density of the mountain, Maskelyne turned to the mathematician on his team, Charles Hutton, to calculate the volume.
This is where Charles Hutton came up with the idea of using contour lines, lines of equal elevation, to help us work out the volume.
So imagine we cut our mountain up into small pillars. This is almost a rectangular prism, a box. And we do know the formula for a rectangular prism. It's
width times the height times the length.
And we could add up the volume of each pillar to get the whole volume of the mountain. By connecting the different observations from different points, he could make a line of places along the same height. So using his contour map, he could know the height of every one of his little pillars, and then by taking the volume of each pillar, he'd add them all up and get the volume of Mount 𝘃𝗏𝗋𝗋.
You got the density, we've got the volume, you multiply that together, and we get the mass of the mountain. Step 1.
Step 2 was to work out the effect of gravitational pull exerted on a pendulum by the mountain, a theory that was first suggested by Isaac Newton, but not believed to be practically achievable, owing to the tiny movements involved.
They were trying to measure how the mass of the mountain 𝘃𝗏𝗋𝗋 would attract a plumb bob from the vertical. So I'll show you how it works. So we have a plumb bob here, and if I were standing on the ground, the plumb bob would point straight down to the Earth's center of mass. Now, if I'm next to a mountain, the plumb bob would be deflected ever so slightly towards the center of the mass of the mountain. And if I know the weight of the mountain, I can measure the amount of deflection, the angle created, and then I can use that to determine the mass of the Earth. So what Maskelyne ended up doing was some rather complicated astronomy to determine the very tiny, tiny angles at which the plumb bob was deflected from the vertical.
Maskelyne and his team were able to use their figures along with a complex set of equations based on Newton's previous theories to achieve their final result.
Maskelyne, Hutton and the team calculated the mass of the Earth as 4.5 million billion kilograms. And just to give you a sense of how good their calculation was, the actual Earth's mass nowadays we know is 6 million billion kilograms, and back then they calculated pretty much 75% accuracy, and that's incredible.
Maskelyne's result proved conclusively that the Earth was not hollow. It also paved the way to calculate the relative properties of the other planets in the solar system.
I'm a bit biased. I'm going to say maths is the underpinning of science discovery, because without maths, we wouldn't have the equations, the formulas to develop our science and technology.
We had a great day. We did some climbing, saw some beautiful views, did some good science. That's a great day for me. There we go, our little house in the valley.
Wow.
During the 17 weeks Maskelyne and his team were based on Mount Schiehallion, their only refuge from the elements was a mountain bothy.
Who would live in a house like this? Would you like a cup of tea, Eric?
Oh, yes, please.
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay.
Here's to a good day of hiking.
Maskelyne and the team, they had a celebration at the end, as one would do, but they got a bit exuberant.
Well, somehow it burned down.
Yeah, so hopefully Monkman and Seagull won't be repeating that.
But there's a nice story to the end of that. There was a guy who played the fiddle for them to entertain them, and his fiddle burned with it. So Maskelyne felt so sorry for him that he bought him a Stradivarius.
Yeah, wonderful. Must be worth a lot now.
Oh, yeah, now it would be.
So raise a glass to Maskelyne.
Very well.
And to us.
Excellent. Bye-bye, bossy. I like the idea that people could think and experiment and learn new things.
Yeah, it is a wonderful thought, the idea of people experimenting, trying to get towards an objective truth. So obviously we've got the arts, the liberal arts, where subjectivity comes into play. If I say to you, this journey is a pleasant one, you might say, oh, Bob, it's really warm, so the subjectivity comes into play. But one thing I found joyous or unbridled about sciences was that search for an objective truth that we can agree on.
Ooh, now you're going into philosophy of science.
Okay.
You have to be careful.
Science is a search for a accepted truth within a 95% confidence interval. Is that even controversial?
Science could go into a lot of very complicated philosophy about what science is.
In the mid-1700s, something special was going on north of the border: the Scottish Enlightenment. At this time, Scotland boasted a greater concentration of universities than anywhere else in the country. In Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen and St Andrews, scholars strove to understand the natural world and improve society through new ideas and inventions.
By the Scottish Enlightenment, there was a move towards empiricism, the idea that we should be able to look at the world and gain knowledge by experiment, observation. Ultimately, all knowledge should be based on gathering different facts together rather than just on taking somebody's word for it.
Monkman and Seagull are in Scotland's capital, Edinburgh, the epicenter of the nation's scientific and philosophical thought. They've decided to visit the National Library to see the first edition of a book that would bring knowledge to the masses.
Growing up as a child, one of my most endearing memories, I remember one Sunday morning, we turned up downstairs and wrapped up these volumes of books. And opening it up, it was the 𝗔𝗶𝗄𝗏 Britannica. And that book changed my life. It influenced my desire to learn about the world. And even to this day, this book is at the bottom of my feet. So I wake up every morning and I see the 𝗔𝗶𝗏𝗏 Britannica. Am I holding it the right way? Thank you. Very blessed to touch this book.
Considered one of the enduring achievements of the Scottish Enlightenment, the 𝗔𝗶𝗏𝗏 Britannica was a magnum opus of information, conceived, compiled and published entirely in Edinburgh.
Shall we see what it says about Canada?
Yeah, let's do that.
Canada, or New France, an extensive tract of North America, bounded by New Britain and the British colonies and Hudson's Bay in the north. Its chief town is Quebec. Well, that's fairly accurate. I mean, it's no longer the chief town, but...
No, it's nice that it's next to canals, because we've got canal mania coming up towards the 80s and 90s as well.
Editor William Smellie believed that knowledge should be accessible to all, regardless of their background. From how to brew beer, to classifying the bones in our bodies, and even describing the orbit of the planets.
There's a nice plate here for astronomy. Look at the smiling sun, the sun in its splendor.
It looks like the flag of Uruguay.
Yeah, it looks like it could be in a children's book almost. There was something going on in the mid-1700s that was a bit different from what had come before. Previously, scholars tried to keep ideas secret. Leonardo da Vinci wrote backwards. Isaac Newton had to be cajoled into publishing his work.
It's one interesting thing about mathematics it says here. Pure mathematics have one peculiar advantage, that they occasion no disputes among wrangling disputants, as in other branches of knowledge. Maths is a true form of knowledge. I wonder whether the word chronometers made it into this edition. Chronometer, in general, denotes any instrument or machine used in measuring time. Harrison hasn't made it here yet.
The first print run of 3,000 copies sold out in a heartbeat, and the Encyclopaedia Britannica remained in print for nearly 250 years, finally becoming fully digital in 2012.
When online encyclopedias came along, the need for having any sort of print edition pretty much diminished. Personally, I believe that in the future, scholars will look back at online encyclopedias of the early 21st century and say that they were one of the glories of the age, and say, isn't it amazing that people were able to put that together through the use of shared endeavor.
Would you rather fight 100 duck-sized horses or one horse-sized duck?
100 duck-sized horses.
Even though they'd all be coming towards you with their hooves. I'd be tempted to take on the horse-sized duck. Well, they're not in water.
The dissemination of print literature in the 1700s helped fuel scientific experimentation. But despite its growing acceptance, science was yet to become a mainstream profession, meaning innovators had to be wealthy enough to fund their own research or find someone willing to be their benefactor.
In those days, there weren't too many opportunities to make a living as a scientist. You could either be independently wealthy, or you could work for somebody who was.
It's 1774, and Monkman and Seagull are in Wiltshire at the birthplace of another momentous discovery on their wish list of era-defining breakthroughs. Bowood House, the palatial home of the Marquis of Lansdowne.
I don't think I ever expected I'd be visiting too many stately homes on this kind of a venture.
No, you wouldn't. You'd have got scientific interest.
Yeah.
Going to be laboratories, museums.
Yeah. But this was a laboratory in a stately home.
I know. It is the perfect Venn diagram.
Clergyman and chemist Joseph Priestley was one of the most intriguing figures of the Enlightenment. Having written extensively about electricity and accidentally discovering how to make carbonated water, Priestley was employed at Bowood House both as its librarian and as science tutor to the Earl of Shelburne's 2 young sons, whose descendants have lived here ever since.
Lovely to meet you, Lord Lansdowne and Bobby.
Hello, Bobby. Very nice to see you. Eric?
Pleasure to meet you, Lord Lansdowne. Thank you.
We're going to go and have a look and see some exciting things. After you.
Priestley set up a laboratory in a room next to the library in order to conduct his own DIY experiments. It was here in 1774 that he would stumble upon a breakthrough that would transform our understanding of the air we breathe.
For me, science is the pursuit of truth. And as a child, in pursuit of knowledge, mathematics and science, I really found actually these are absolute truths about the world, why atoms behave in a particular way, why certain reactions occur. And for me, trying to understand the world in that way was the most comforting way to understand my place in it.
So we're just approaching what was the laboratory. My ancestor engaged Priestley. He had 2 boys. He needed somebody to help instruct them, and one of the things was to teach them science as much as he could. Joseph Priestley was, of course, very original, a brilliant man, obviously, and Priestley was here with my ancestor basically for 7 years. On the 1st of August 1774, Joseph Priestley discovered oxygen in this room.
For centuries, many believed there were just 4 elements: earth, water, air, and fire. The 4 elements theory was first refuted in the 17th century. But by the time Priestley was tinkering in his laboratory, it was being thoroughly and unequivocally debunked. Here at Burwood House, Priestley was experimenting by focusing the sun's rays through a lens onto a solution of liquid. What happened next would change our understanding of the elements forever.
Just imagine sitting at dinner saying, well, what happened today, Joseph? Well, something absolutely thrilling happened. We set this prism up and the sunlight was pouring in. Then we saw the bubbles beginning to grow and we captured the bubbles, and that was the beginning, and we have discovered this oxygen, basically. Must have been fascinating. Wasn't it really fun?
Experimenting with the collected gas, Priestley soon realized it had the power to reignite a smoldering flame.
So I think we should have a bit of fun by recreating Priestley's experiments in the very room where he would have performed them.
Boys just want to have fun.
You better wear these safety goggles.
So we're going to do an experiment. We've got a matchstick, a splint, and a jar with a gas inside.
Which one?
Something that constitutes 20.8% of the Earth's atmosphere.
Is that oxygen?
Correct.
We'll light a match, and what are you going to do with the match once it's lit?
So I'm going to blow it out, not completely, but so it's smoldering on the edge of life. And then you'll open the jar, and we'll see what happens when we put it inside the jar.
Okay. There we are.
Can you open the jar?
Oh, there we go.
I wonder what's happening here.
It looks like the embers have relit as a result of being exposed to the oxygen. So fire consumes oxygen.
Oxygen is reviving for flames.
Indeed. Once Priestley was able to isolate this substance, he called it dephlogisticated air.
Which we obviously now understand as oxygen.
He named the new substance dephlogisticated air, based on the prevailing theory that flammable objects contained a substance called phlogiston, which was released when the object caught fire. Priestley wasn't unique in his discovery. Swedish scientist 𝗘𝗅 had also discovered the same element 2 years earlier, but as Priestley was the first to publish his findings, he got the recognition. Finally, 5 years later, French chemist Antoine Lavoisier renamed the gas oxygen.
The work of Joseph Priestley gave us a better idea of what gases are. The idea that air is not just one thing, it's a combination of different gases that have different properties.
Joseph Priestley, I think, changed the game for chemistry. Since him, people have thought, actually, trying to understand what makes up a world is such an important endeavor. So, starting off, chemical history.
Progress in our observations of the natural world was by now cultivating a great spirit of national endeavor. It's 1784, and Monkman and Seagull are en route to Oxford to discover more about an activity that was driven by the experimental impulses of ordinary people from all walks of life: hot air ballooning.
It's just an exciting time. People had different ideas, and people were very excited about balloons. They call it balloon mania.
Apparently inspired by observing laundry billow over a fireplace while it was drying, the French Montgolfier brothers pioneered ballooning by experimenting with hot air trapped in paper bags. Their enthusiasm for conquering the skies quickly spread to Britain.
They had a passion for it. They wanted to show it could be done. People wanted to see, could you steer these balloons
with paddles?
With paddles. That was a scientific question. You know what the whole balloon mania reminds me of most? The space race.
In the 60s,
yeah. What everybody wanted from balloons and from spaceships is transportation. They want to go from England to France by hot air balloon or to Mars by rocket.
Like Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Ballooning's popularity with the general public spread like wildfire. Suddenly, daredevil innovators were becoming national celebrities. In 1784, James Tytler of Edinburgh was the first Brit to achieve liftoff, but his balloon only travelled 800 metres. In the same year, Vincenzo Lunardi, an Italian, took off from London. But perhaps the most captivating balloon mania story is that of James Sadler, an Oxford pastry chef who became an overnight sensation when he flew 4 miles in his homemade balloon. Monkman and Seagull are at the very site of his maiden voyage.
So Sadler's claim to fame is very specific. He wasn't the first British person to fly, but he was the first Englishman to fly.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
His family were bakers and confectioners, so their shop is in the high street. He flew from Merton Fields, so he was really pretty much flying from the back garden.
They heard that Sadler, when he was in, I think, Cheltenham, they closed the town for his arrival. My background of being a pastry chef, being a balloon pioneer, it was almost like Jamie Oliver if he goes on to become Richard Branson. Did he capture that sort of element?
Yeah, I think he did, but I don't think he was playing to it as much as some of the other balloonists. I think he was more of a celebrity by accident rather than by design.
Did balloon mania sort of fit into this theme of pioneering activity and ingenuity?
It did. There was a lot of interest in science, so people were excited about these experiments in gases. But I think ballooning, because there's something physical about it, and because it's kind of, in a way, an adventure into an extra dimension, it attracted people's imagination in a slightly different way.
Was it dangerous flying?
Oh, terribly dangerous, yeah. I mean, these were really courageous people. I mean, courageous, reckless. I mean, there's a reason why it's called balloon madness. They just didn't have any of our sort of ideas about health and safety. People would just have a go. And they had no idea where they were going to end up or whether the balloon was going to catch fire. And there were some awful ballooning accidents.
How did they choose the first people to go up in a hot air balloon?
The Montgolfier brothers in France thought about using convicts from the Bastille because I think there was a slight feeling that, oh, well, if something happened, it didn't really matter too much. But then they thought, well, actually, if it was successful, these convicts might then become great national heroes, and they didn't really want that either. So instead of that, a man called 𝗵𝗏𝗄𝗏 went up, very courageous, because, of course, nobody knew whether they were going to survive, and it was successful. So after that, balloon mania just kind of takes off.
Well, should we go and see one then?
Yeah, we're going to have our own ascent, romantic interaction with nature.
Yeah.
Very exciting. Good luck. Bye-bye.
Hi there.
Good morning.
I'm Eric.
Hi there, I'm Nick.
Hi, Nick and Bobby. So we've come for a flight today.
Well, I've got some bad news, I'm afraid. It's far too windy to fly, so we're going to have to stay on the ground today.
Oh, dear.
In 1784, the notion of health and safety was yet to be invented. Balloon mania pilots were undeterred by high winds or foul weather.
The early pioneers of lighter-than-air travel were quite brave. Some of them died. This was something that sort of daredevils would do, and many people who did it never wanted to do it again.
It did feel a bit blustery on the way here.
Yeah. Well, can we at least try a ride in your basket?
Absolutely. Step in.
Okay, let's try it out.
Okay.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll turn the gas on here. We'll make a spark. And if you pull that one there.
Wow, that's warm.
So that's the quiet burner that we use when we're near animals. This main burner is the one we use for most of the time for climbing. So you pull that one, it's a lot louder.
Here goes.
That is the sound.
Despite the spectacle and excitement early hot air ballooning offered the British public, its practical application as a mode of transport was ultimately limited.
They were never able to make a hot air balloon that was steerable, that could transport people from one place to another, so they didn't have personal transport applications.
But as the new century dawns, one transportation breakthrough is about to have a profound impact on British society. And Monkman and Seagull are on their way to have a ride on it.
I always think of development of science as like a passing the baton. Different people pick up the baton and add something else on it.
Well, I think often you see if somebody has an initial idea and then a lot of people build on it. I mean, if you look at steam engines, for instance, there were a lot of people who developed improvements.
Monkman and Seagull are in 𝗀𝗶𝗃𝗍𝗃 in Shropshire, the site of an iron foundry that helped give birth to one of the world's most iconic and significant creations.
Hello, duckies.
By now, there were more than 2,000 steam engines in Britain, pumping water out of mines, powering factory machinery, and keeping textile mills running round the clock. James Watt's original patent from 1769 expressly prohibited others from adapting his design. But mining engineer Richard Trevithick had other ideas. When Watt's patent expired, Trevithick started building steam engines that would rival James Watt's. He introduced a smaller and stronger cylinder, higher pressure steam, and then, in a stroke of genius, wheels. The steam locomotive was born.
Hi, I'm Eric. Pleasure to meet you.
Pleased to meet you.
Can we learn more about your train?
Ask any question you want.
What's the top speed that this can achieve?
We don't know. We know that roughly Trevithick wanted to replace the horse. A horse walks at 4.5 miles an hour, so we presume he got up to that speed.
Sam, these are high-pressure steam engines. How much pounds per square inch can this take?
This one?
Yeah.
Well, we've got a safety valve on the top there. That will blow off at 60 pounds per square inch. That's it, maximum. Yeah. But we like to have it at 40 pounds to drive it, because you don't want to lose steam down the bottom of the track and you're stuck. You've got to, you know, so roughly 40 it needs to actually make it move, yes.
What Trevithick did was create an engine that works at a higher pressure than comparable Watt engines. Having a higher pressure allows you to have a higher initial temperature and thus greater efficiency. If you have high pressure, you can have a smaller engine, which can then go on a locomotive. So a steam engine makes a piston go back and forth.
That's right, yes.
How do they convert the back and forth motion of the piston into the circular motion of the wheels?
The piston's in the center here, and it's moving backwards and forwards. It pushes this yoke backwards and forwards. The yoke is connected to that arm which runs to the flywheel. Turns the flywheel, there's a shaft across the front, brings the motion into these gears here, and then the train will move.
The locomotive would soon replace the horse-drawn wagons that had traditionally transported mining materials from one place to another. Trevithick initially tried it out on a road, before he had the idea of putting it on smooth metal rails which offered less resistance. 35 years after James Watt first patented his steam engine, Richard Trevithick had invented the first steam railway locomotive.
Throw some pieces on.
They heaved in the coal for the steam.
Give it a good chuck to the back.
Heaved in the coal for the steam. Rolling up Camborne Hill, coming down.
There you go. Mind your head.
Thank you. Well, in the early days of rail, they used to do fun things like see if a person or a horse could keep up with a locomotive. Do you think we should try that?
We should do that. One of us on the locomotive and the other one behind.
Shall we flip a coin?
Yes, a bit of binomial decision-making. Tails never fails.
Heads.
Oh, tails always fails.
My turn first, then?
So I'm going to be trying to keep up with you.
You can do it, Bobby!
Maybe I'm being controversial here, but I think without Trevithick, the Industrial Revolution wouldn't have happened in the same way in which it did, because he essentially made power and energy portable. He said, actually, we can take this energy and move it around. So without him, I think our modern world wouldn't exist. Marks. Set. Go! Mark. He's catching, he's gaining on us.
𝗕𝗏𝗃 took steam engines, made them locomotives, and put them on rails. These were ideas that were later taken up by other inventors like the Stephensons to create railways, which in turn had a great influence on society that I'm sure we'll explore in a bit more detail later on.
We're gonna go on pursuit now. In the sort of race to industrialize ourselves, I feel as there's a baton being passed on between industrialists and real great minds. So you can really see knowledge being passed from one person to the other, and then real advancements being made in society in the back of that.
In this 50-year period, Monkman and Seagull have witnessed a transformation in the lives of ordinary Britons. They've discovered how we supersized our economy by conquering the oceans and pioneering a mechanized factory system. And to cap it all, they've charted the development of steam power from its pioneering early days to the birth of the railways.
The Industrial Revolution sort of set off a process of continual discovery. Somebody described it as a wave of gadgets.
And it's almost like, yeah, like a snowball. Once it starts moving, it just makes it easier to progress. I feel like we're already astonished at what we've seen in this half-century. I'm just curious to see what they do with this, the first half of the 19th century. How can they improve on it even more?
Onwards to the 19th century.
Let's do it.
Next time,
there it is.
There's the rocket. Woo!
As the Industrial Revolution gathers pace, Britain takes to the rails.
Stephenson's rocket returns to Rain Hill.
Yes.
The world's biggest and most luxurious ocean liner affords us the promise of global travel.
Ultimately, the world underwent what's now described as the first period of globalization.
And Monkman and Seagull get fired up by the achievements of one of the world's greatest scientists.
So would you say Humphrey Davy is almost like the Ed Sheeran of science?
Who's Ed Sheeran?